The wedding coordinator had just reached for the bridal suite door. "Emma, it's time." Before I could answer, the door burst open. A little girl no older than 6 ran inside with tears streaming down her face. Her dress was wrinkled, her breathing uneven, and before anyone could stop her, she wrapped both hands around mine. She looked straight into my eyes. "Why are you marrying my daddy?" Every sound in the room disappeared. The makeup artist froze with a brush in her hand. My maid of honor stared without speaking. Even my mother looked completely lost. I recognized the little girl instantly. Lily's. Daniel had shown me pictures of his daughter dozens of times. He'd always said she lived several states away with her mother and wouldn't be able to attend the wedding because of school. So why was she standing here? Before I could ask another question, Daniel rushed into the room. The moment he saw Lily holding my hand, all the color drained from his face. He didn't smile. He didn't hug her. He just stood there frozen. Lily squeezed my fingers even tighter. "You can't marry him," she whispered through her tears. Then, for the first time since I'd met Daniel, I saw genuine panic in his eyes. Outside the bridal suite, guests began turning toward the commotion. Curious voices drifted through the hallway, and the wedding music suddenly felt distant, almost unreal. I looked from Lily to Daniel, waiting for him to explain. Instead, he forced a nervous smile. "Emma, she's upset. Let me handle this." I frowned. "You told me Lily wasn't coming." "I know, this wasn't supposed to happen." Those 6 words landed harder than they should have. Not, "I'm glad she's here." Not, "Let me introduce you." Only, "This wasn't supposed to happen." Lily shook her head. "He lied." Daniel took one step forward. "Lily, sweetheart, come with me." She hid behind me instead. "No." The adults around us exchanged confused glances. My bridesmaids looked at Daniel, then at me, unsure whether to leave or stay. I crouched to Lily's level. "Where's your mum?" Without saying another word, Lily raised one trembling finger and pointed through the open doorway toward the ceremony hall. A woman sat quietly in the very first row. She wasn't crying. She wasn't making a scene. She simply watched us with exhausted eyes. "Mommy," Lily said. My heart skipped. Daniel had told me his ex-wife wanted nothing to do with him anymore. He'd never mentioned she would be anywhere near this wedding. I slowly stood. "Daniel." He immediately stepped in front of me. "Please don't go over there." "Why?" "It's complicated." "No," I replied quietly. "Complicated isn't an answer." His voice dropped into a desperate whisper. "Emma, everyone's waiting. Let's get married first, we can talk afterward." I looked past him at the woman in the front row. Then I looked back at the man I was about to marry. For the first time since our engagement, I wondered whether I knew him at all. Ignoring Daniel's outstretched hand, I walked toward the ceremony hall, and toward the woman he clearly didn't want me to meet. Daniel caught up with me before I reached the front row. He gently grabbed my wrist, careful not to make a scene. "Emma, please, just give me 5 minutes." I pulled my hand free. 5 minutes to do what? To explain. Then explain. He glanced toward the guests gathering near the entrance. More people had noticed that the ceremony wasn't starting. Conversations were growing louder. "Not here," he said. I followed him into a small room beside the chapel, leaving the door slightly open. Lily stood outside with one of my bridesmaids, refusing to leave her mother's side. The moment the door closed, Daniel exhaled heavily. "Sarah wasn't invited. You never told me she was even coming." "I didn't know she would." "Then why did you look terrified when you saw Lily?" He rubbed both hands across his face. "Because Sarah likes creating drama." I stared at him. "So this is her doing?" "She's bitter about the divorce." His answer came too quickly. "Lily's emotional," he continued. "She doesn't understand what's happening. She saw me getting married and panicked." I folded my arms. Then why did she tell me not to marry you? Because she's 6. His explanation sounded simple. Too simple. I searched his face, waiting for the confidence I usually saw whenever he solved problems. Instead, he looked like a man trying to keep something from collapsing. As he spoke, memories I hadn't questioned before began lining up in my mind. The certified envelopes that arrived every few months. Daniel always collected them before I could. Just boring legal paperwork, he'd say. Whenever I asked whether everything from his divorce had finally been settled, he would wave the subject away. I don't want to spend our evenings talking about my past. At first, I'd thought he simply wanted to move on. Now that answer felt different. There had also been the cancelled dinner 6 months earlier. He'd received a phone call, looked at the screen, and immediately left the restaurant. It has to do with custody, he'd explained later. When I'd asked if everything was okay, he'd answered with only 2 words. It's handled. He never offered another detail. Even mentioning Sarah's name seemed to irritate him. I remembered asking one afternoon, "Do you and Sarah ever have to communicate?" He had sighed. Only when absolutely necessary. The conversation ended there because he clearly didn't want to continue. Back then, I'd respected his boundaries. Now I wondered whether those boundaries had been walls. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. The door opened just enough for Lily to peek inside. She looked at me instead of her father. "My mommy's been crying." Daniel immediately stepped toward the door. "Lily, honey, this isn't the time." She ignored him. "She cried a lot." His voice sharpened. "Lily." The little girl flinched. I knelt beside her. "Why?" She looked down at her shoes. "Because she didn't know if you'd find out." Daniel's shoulders stiffened. "Lily, go wait with your mom." She quietly backed away, and the door closed again. The silence between us felt heavier than before. I looked directly at Daniel. "Are you telling me everything?" He held my gaze for a second. Then he looked away. "Emma, everyone we love is sitting out there. We've spent months planning today." "That isn't what I asked." "We can work through whatever this is after the ceremony." His answer was another request instead of the truth. Outside, the string quartet stopped playing. Someone asked loudly whether there was a problem. Daniel reached for my hand. "Please trust me." I took one step backward instead. Without another word, I opened the side door and walked straight toward the woman sitting in the front row. Behind me, Daniel hurried after me. "Emma, don't." Daniel's voice echoed through the chapel. "Emma, please stop." I didn't. Every guest had turned toward us. Conversations died away one by one as I walked down the aisle, not toward the altar, but toward the woman sitting quietly in the front row. She slowly stood as I approached. Up close, she looked exhausted more than angry. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no hint that she wanted to embarrass me. "I'm Sarah," she said softly. "I'm Emma." Before either of us could continue, Daniel stepped between us. "This isn't necessary." Sarah looked at him. "It became necessary when you refused to tell her." Several guests exchanged uneasy glances. My parents had risen from their seats. Daniel's parents looked just as confused. I kept my eyes on Sarah. "I'd like to hear what you came to say." Daniel shook his head. "Emma, she's trying to ruin this." Sarah sighed. "If I wanted to ruin your wedding, I wouldn't have waited until the last minute." She looked at Lily, who stood beside her clutching a stuffed rabbit. "I didn't even want to come." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Don't do this." "I wasn't going to," Sarah replied calmly. "Lily begged me to." Lily nodded, tears filling her eyes again. "I told Mommy you should know." A murmur spread through the chapel. People weren't whispering because there was a child. They were whispering because nothing about Daniel's behavior made sense anymore. Sarah reached into a leather folder she had been carrying. I brought these because I hoped I wouldn't need them. She carefully removed several official documents. Daniel immediately stepped forward. Don't. She held them away from him. I'm not here to humiliate you. She turned toward me instead. I'm here because you deserve the truth before you make a decision that can't be undone. My hands trembled as she offered me the papers. The top page bore both her name and Daniel's. There were court case numbers, filing dates, hearing notices. I looked up in confusion. What am I looking at? Sarah answered quietly. Our divorce case. I frowned. But Daniel told me your divorce was finalized years ago. It wasn't. The words seemed to drain every ounce of air from the room. I looked at Daniel. He forced a strained smile. It's complicated. No, Sarah replied, it's unfinished. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. The relationship ended years ago. That's not what I asked, I said. He gestured toward the documents. It's just paperwork. Just paperwork, Sarah repeated. A marriage isn't just paperwork. The officiant, who had quietly approached during the exchange, glanced at the documents before looking at Daniel. Is this accurate? Daniel hesitated. That hesitation answered more than any explanation could. Gasps rippled through the guests. My father took a slow step forward. Daniel's mother looked at her husband in disbelief. I thought everything had been finalized, she whispered. His father looked equally stunned. So did I. It became painfully clear that I wasn't the only person who had believed Daniel. I stared at the papers again. Every filing date was recent. Every hearing notice proved the legal process was still active. I slowly lowered the documents. If this is true, I couldn't finish the sentence, because I already knew what it meant. I looked directly at Daniel. My voice was steady despite the chaos surrounding us. Were you ever free to marry me? The chapel fell completely silent. No music. No whispers. Everyone waited for Daniel to answer. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. His eyes moved from me to the officiant, then to his parents, as if he were searching for someone who could rescue him. Finally he spoke. I thought everything would be resolved by now. I didn't move. That's not what I asked. He swallowed. I wanted to tell you. Sarah let out a tired breath. No, Daniel, you wanted to tell her after the wedding. He didn't deny it. Instead, he looked at me. The marriage between Sarah and me has been over for years. We haven't been together, we both knew that. Sarah nodded once. That's true. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope that maybe there had been some terrible misunderstanding. Then Sarah continued. But ending a relationship isn't the same as ending a marriage. She turned toward me. We started the divorce process years ago. Every time the court required another filing, another signature, or another hearing, Daniel delayed it. Daniel rubbed his forehead. I was overwhelmed. You ignored notices, Sarah replied. I was busy. You missed deadlines. I planned to catch up. She looked at him sadly. You always planned to. The pieces I'd ignored over the past year suddenly fit together with painful clarity. The legal envelopes he always hid before I could read the sender. The afternoons when he'd abruptly cancelled our plans because he had to take care of something. The unexplained transfers from our shared wedding savings, account that he dismissed as temporary expenses. The mornings he'd insisted on checking the mailbox before I did. The conversations that ended the moment I mentioned lawyers, custody, or paperwork. None of those moments had seemed important by themselves. Together they formed a pattern. I wasn't looking at one lie. I was looking at a life built around avoiding the truth. Daniel stepped closer. I never cheated on you. I know. I loved you. I took a slow breath. Then why wasn't the truth enough? He looked down. I was afraid you'd leave. So you decided not to give me the choice. He had no answer. The officiant cleared his throat gently. I'm very sorry, but I can't legally perform this ceremony unless Mr. Brooks can provide proof that he's free to marry. Daniel didn't argue. He couldn't. Around us, reality began settling over the room. The florist quietly asked a venue employee what should be done with the flowers. The photographer lowered his camera. Several guests slowly returned to their seats, no longer expecting a wedding. Others quietly walked outside, giving both families space. Daniel's uncle shook his head. I had no idea. One of Daniel's closest friends spoke up. Last year you told me the divorce had already been finalized. Another relative nodded. He told us the same thing. With every voice, Daniel's explanation became harder to defend. His parents stood together, visibly shaken. His mother looked at him with tears in her eyes. You lied to us too. Daniel couldn't meet her gaze. He turned back to me instead. Emma, please. He reached for my hand. I can fix this. I slowly looked down at the engagement ring he'd placed on my finger 14 months earlier. It had once represented trust. Now it felt unbearably heavy. Without saying a word, I slipped it off. Daniel's eyes widened. Emma. I placed the ring in his open palm. His fingers instinctively closed around it. I can't marry someone who asks me to build a future on a lie. He took one desperate step toward me. Please don't walk away. Before he could say anything else, I turned, left him standing in the aisle, and walked toward the front of the chapel to face every guest waiting for an answer. I stopped at the front of the chapel and slowly turned to face the guests. Every pair of eyes was on me. Some looked confused. Some looked heartbroken. Others simply waited. I took a steady breath. I'm sorry, I said, there won't be a wedding today. The room remained silent. I came here believing I was making a lifelong commitment with someone who had been honest with me. I've learned that isn't true. I glanced at Daniel. I'm not ending this because of his past. I'm ending it because I wasn't given the truth before being asked to build a future. No one interrupted. I believe honesty is the foundation of marriage. Without it, there isn't a marriage to begin with. I stepped away from the altar. There was no shouting. No insults. Nothing left to argue. Sarah walked forward, still holding the folder of documents. She looked at me before speaking to the room. I never wanted this to happen today. Her voice was calm, almost weary. Daniel and I separated years ago. We both agreed our marriage was over, and we both wanted a divorce. She paused. But every time the legal process required another step, it was delayed. Hearings were postponed, documents weren't completed, deadlines passed. She looked toward Daniel. I kept hoping he would finally finish what we'd started. Daniel stood motionless. Sarah continued. He told Emma he was divorced because he was afraid she'd leave if she knew the truth. She lowered the folder. I couldn't keep quiet after Lily asked me what would happen if Emma married someone who was still legally married. The chapel was so quiet that Lily's small footsteps echoed across the floor. She walked over to me with her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. Tears still filled her eyes. I didn't want you to be sad later. My own eyes filled. I knelt so we were face to face. You don't have anything to be sorry for. She looked uncertain. I made everybody stop the wedding. I gently shook my head. No. I smiled through the tears. You helped me stop the wrong wedding. Lily wrapped her arms around my neck. I hugged her back. When she returned to Sarah, I noticed several guests quietly wiping away tears. Daniel's mother slowly approached me. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I truly believed everything had been finalized. I know, I replied. She turned toward her son. I raised you to tell the truth." Daniel lowered his head. His father stood beside her. "We defended you because we believed you." Neither of them had another word to say. One by one, Daniel's friends admitted they had also been told the divorce was complete years earlier. Each conversation stripped away another excuse. The deception hadn't been aimed only at me. It had reached almost everyone who trusted him. The wedding coordinator quietly informed Daniel that the venue would still charge cancellation fees because everything had already been prepared. The caterer confirmed the food had been made. The florist explained the custom arrangements couldn't be returned. There would also be legal costs waiting for him before any future wedding could even be considered. Those consequences belonged to him alone. I gathered my parents, my maid of honor, and the people who had stood beside me from the beginning. No one pitied me. They simply surrounded me with quiet support as we walked out of the chapel together. Outside, the afternoon sun was shining exactly as it had been when I arrived. Only my future had changed. The months that followed weren't easy. I cancelled contracts, returned gifts, moved out of the apartment Daniel and I had planned to share as husband and wife. Eventually, I returned to my classroom. Being surrounded by children every day reminded me that trust is built through countless small moments of honesty. I also found myself thinking about Lily. Not with sadness, with gratitude. Several months later, a handwritten envelope arrived at my home. Inside was a short note from Sarah. It read, "Thank you for showing kindness to Lily that day. She was terrified you would hate her for speaking up. Instead, you showed her what real courage looks like. I'll never forget that." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a keepsake box. For a long time, I'd believed my wedding day would always be remembered as the worst day of my life. Eventually, I realized it wasn't. It was the day the truth reached me before it was too late. The wedding never happened, but the truth arrived just in time.